It feels like the global rulebook is being torn up, doesn't it? Well, that's because it is. The era of cooperation seems to be fading, and a new, much more competitive age is dawning. So let's break down what this tectonic shift really means for the future of power.
At the heart of it all is this quote. For decades, the big question was, how do we all grow together? Now, that's being replaced by a much harder-edged question. How do we secure our share first? It's a total shift to a zero-sum game. This idea that for me to win, you might just have to lose.
Now, I know what you're thinking. When you hear about a huge surge in nationalism, your mind probably jumps straight to 1914, Europe, right on the brink of World War I. And yet, there are some echoes of that intense national pride. But here's the fascinating part. The reasons for it today are completely different.
See, back in 1914, European nationalism was all about the cult of the offensive. It was aggressive, it was expansionist. Today, though, especially in the global south, nationalism is being used in a totally different way, more like a defensive shield. It's not about conquering your neighbors anymore, it's about protecting what's yours.
For a lot of developing nations, this idea of globalism has started to feel less like a partnership and more like a system of outside control. Whether it's through debt, sanctions, or environmental rules they feel hold them back. So for them, nationalism has become this vital tool for survival. It's how they protect their resources, their industries, and their own sovereignty.
And this is all driven by a really key concept, the rise of the civilizational state. These are nations that are basically saying, you know what, we're done with the idea that there's one universal Western model for success. Instead, they're digging deep into their own unique history, their own culture, and making that the foundation of how they govern.
And this isn't just some abstract theory either. You can see it happening in real time. Just look at countries like India, or Turkey, or Vietnam. Each one, in its own way, is really leaning into this identity-driven model, putting national pride and their unique history right at the center of everything.
So what happens when every country starts looking inward, focusing on its own path? Well, the very institutions that were supposed to be the glue holding the world together start to crack. And that leads to what we can only call the Great Fragmentation.
You know, the problem with big organizations like the UN or the IMF isn't just that they're failing. It's that they've become sclerotic. That's a great word. It means they're rigid, they're stiff. They're basically stuck in a design from 1945 that is just completely out of sync with the fast-moving, multi-sided world we live in today.
I mean, just look at the UN. Its whole original purpose was to prevent wars. But now, with the Security Council so often paralyzed by vetoes, what's its main function? It's become managing the fallout of wars it can't stop. It's gone from being the world's peacekeeper to being the world's humanitarian delivery service. And this isn't just happening on the global stage. Even powerful Western clubs like NATO and the EU are feeling the pressure. They're dealing with what's being called an internal sovereignty crisis, where their own member states are starting to put their national interests first, fracturing the whole group from the inside out. A lot of this frustration comes from what you see right here. Look at an institution like the IMF. The Global South represents most of the world's people, but Western nations hold most of the votes. This creates this huge legitimacy gap, and it's no wonder these developing nations are starting to look for other options.
But here's the twist. This isn't just a story about an old system falling apart. The countries that feel left out aren't just sitting around complaining. No, they're actively building a parallel world.
Institutions like the BRICS New Development Bank and the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, these are not side projects anymore. They are quickly becoming the go-to lenders for huge projects all across the Global South. We're literally watching a new center of financial gravity form.
And you can see this new reality changing how security works on the ground. In Africa, for example, a new logic is taking hold. Call it nationalist realism. It goes like this. A crisis erupts, the big global bodies like the UN don't act, so nations just take matters into their own hands, making direct deals to protect themselves. It's about doing what works, not waiting for permission from some committee halfway across the world.
Okay, so if the world is more fragmented, more competitive, what are the new rules of the game? Well, it boils down to two things: becoming way more self-reliant and playing a much more transactional game. The new great game is all about tech sovereignty. This is this national obsession with controlling your own destiny by controlling your own technology. Everything from making your own microchips to generating your own power and even growing your own food. At its heart, it's about one thing: cutting your dependence on anyone else.
And that leads to this huge change in diplomacy. You can pretty much forget about the old idea of permanent, loyal allies. We are now deep in the era of multi-alignment. This means relationships are fluid, they're flexible, and they are based entirely on what serves a country's interests at that specific moment.
And if you want a perfect example, just look at Saudi Arabia. They're buying advanced weapons from the United States. At the same time, they're selling huge amounts of oil to China and partnering with them on AI. And they're also coordinating oil production with Russia. That right there is multi-alignment in action. You work with everyone, even rivals, based purely on what's best for you. This is the new normal.
All right, so let's pull this all together. Where does all of this actually lead? What's the final verdict on this new, fragmented world? Well, it really comes down to the return of a very old, very powerful force.
First off, the end of the old global order isn't going to be some dramatic collapse. It won't be a sudden bang. These organizations will still be around, they'll hold their summits, they'll write their reports, but the real power, the important decisions, they will have already moved somewhere else. It's more of a slow, quiet slide into irrelevance.
And that brings us to the ultimate conclusion. After decades of being held in check by global rules and alliances, the nation-state is back. It is, once again, the undisputed king on the global chessboard, and this time, it's making its own rules.
But that leaves us with one last massive question to think about. In a world where every single nation is laser-focused on getting its own piece of the pie first, who's left to solve the enormous, shared problems, things like climate change, pandemics, or global financial meltdowns, that, at the end of the day, belong to every single one of us?